Welcome to the creation versus evolution discussion. One of the things you'll find out in here is that there's a lot more evidence for creation than there is for evolution. Now let's go to a little background. So why did I do this? Because at one point in time with my scientific background, I had a need to reconcile my scientific background with my Christian faith. And the thing I'll read to you, this is a very broad topic, and we will not cover it all. I encourage you to read and investigate this for yourselves. Have you ever looked at creation? What does it show us? Does it cast doubt on God's Word? What do the laws in effect today and our observations tell us? So here's the agenda. Quickly, we're going to go into a few questions, things that should make you think. We have a vocabulary that we will establish. And what is science? What are the pillars of evolution? What are the counterfeits? What does science tell us from probability, thermodynamics, design, life, genetics, astronomy, and geology? And we'll go into a few links in scriptures. So here's questions for you. What is evolution? Is evolution occurring today? Is the Genesis account true? How old is the earth now? And what evidence are you prepared to accept? So let's talk vocabulary very quickly. It's very common today for us to redefine words at will, but it's very important that we have the same set of definitions. Science is knowledge gained through experience in the present. And that wasn't me that decided that. That is part of the definition of science. So we developed a thing called the scientific method, which helps us investigate what we consider to be things around us. Things have to be observable, testable, repeatable, and really important, falsifiable. That quantifies, in a nutshell, the scientific method. Evidence. What is evidence? It's that which is easily recognized or obvious from the past. That's what evidence is. What is a verdict? A verdict is something legally the best we can do based on evidence. It's a decision that we make based on evidence. Theory. What is a theory? It's assumptions plus the evidence used to explain what we observe. And what is a hypothesis? It's a guess which is still subject to verification or proof. One thing you have to be careful of is beware of those that use the same vocabulary but have a different definition for the words. Let's talk about science. What is it? The question you should ask is, when did it happen? Evolution happened? In the past. Creation happened? In the past. Past events are not reproducible. Remember, we're dealing with science here. Science deals only with what can be observed when? In the present, now. And it must be falsifiable. Therefore, neither is scientific. Let that soak in. Neither creation nor evolution are scientific. Just a quick note, science is just our discovering of what God has already done. Let's talk about the pillars of evolution. Time is a pillar. Evolution says billions of years are required. Mutations is a pillar. It says changes happen to better the organism. And chance is a pillar. The right chance of chemical occurrences led to life. But this is what evolution cannot explain, but Genesis 1 does. Origins. How did nothing suddenly turn into the universe? Where did all the original matter come from? How about life? How did non-living matter become living cells? How about awareness? How does something that's unconscious become conscious? And what about time, space, and matter? The inorganic world, the material. And where did heat come from? The initial energy. Also, other things might be considered. What about morality? Laws of logic and reason. Guess what happens if you knock down the pillars of evolution? The whole house will fall. So let's recognize counterfeits. How do we know how to recognize a counterfeit? Well, first of all, you make the understanding that we cannot possibly learn all that is false. We have to know the true in order to recognize the false. And this is what we're going to be examining. An example. Did you know that the FBI trains agents using real money? If you find an old $20 bill, turn around, use a magnifying glass on the back, and there is a small cat on the roof of the building. Like a 1980 $20 bill now. Talk about relativity for a second. What did Einstein say? He said a tremendous amount of energy is locked up inside all matter. That's the equation E equals mc squared. The energy is equal to the mass times the speed of light squared, and that is a big, big number. Most people will recognize that as like a nuclear device and the amount of energy that gets released from only a couple of pounds of nuclear material. But look in Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning defines when. That's time. In the beginning, God. That's the who, the intelligence behind it all. In the beginning, God created. What did he do? He expended energy. That's the real meaning of that word. It's an expansion of energy. And what did he create? The heavens, space, and the earth, matter. He made a space to put it in and put something in that space. And you can see all those things, time, intelligence, energy, space, and matter all being defined together. So we are relating energy to the matter, and anytime you move something in a distance through a space, there is a speed involved. The maximum speed is the speed of light. So right there you have all the necessary components for E equals mc squared. Matter moving through space in time defines velocity. The maximum velocity is c. So interestingly enough, it didn't come right out and define what it took us 6,000 years to discover, but all the components are there at the very beginning. So let's move on now to the subject of thermodynamics. Remember, we're covering scientific areas. This one has to do with heat and heat transfer. We'll talk about the second law of thermodynamics. What does it say? Everything runs down. We see this all the time. Order and complexity will always decrease with time. Remember this. Order and complexity will always decrease with time. Evolution says that it was less complex in the past and somehow has magically become more complex and ordered. Everything tends toward a lower energy state. Everything. Take some examples. Look at a rusty nail. Nice, clean, shiny iron and oxygen causes an oxidated state, which is a lower energy state and results in what we call rust. A rusty nail. A spinning top. We spin it and it stays spinning forever. No, it actually stops. Why? Because of friction. Everything runs down. How about a breakable light stick? A chemical reaction. You break it and it stays burning for hours and hours and hours and days and years and months and weeks. No, within a couple of hours its brightness has significantly decreased. Why? The chemical reaction has run down. Things have gone to a lower energy state. How about a case of a smoldering cigar? Okay, you have a cigar, you light it, and it burns forever, right? No, everything runs down. Pretty soon the entire cigar is reduced to nothing but ashes. Let's take an example. You take off, go on a trip, and somebody says, you can use my cabin for the weekend. You say, great. When were you there last? Oh, I haven't been there for a year. So you walk into the cabin and the first thing you see is a cigar smoldering on top of the mantle. You look at that cigar and you think, somebody's here. Someone's been here recently, correct? But if somebody has not been here recently, what will we think? There should not be a cigar there, should not be lit. So this is an indicator of time also. So when you look at the first law, what does it say? Energy can't be created or destroyed. If that's the law, a law that has much evidence behind it that cannot be contradicted, where did all the energy come from? Interesting. Let's talk about something about belief. Did you know belief affects your actions? Yes, it does. We'll talk about Newton's law of gravity. Did you know Sir Isaac Newton discovered this very well understood principle? There is a force of attraction between matter, given by the formula on the right. Most believe in gravity today. How would we know? Well, we're all going to go up to the roof after this and we're all going to jump off. Why don't we do that? Because we believe in gravity. What does it do? It affects your actions. Okay? Most people don't jump. Why? Because they believe in gravity. So there you go. Let's talk about the law of probability in mathematics. Did you know that 1 million monkeys typing 1 million keystrokes per second for 1 million years wouldn't create anything useful? As a matter of fact, they couldn't even one time type the first sentence of the Bible. 27 letters, including spaces. 1.96 times 10 to the 77th power of that happening at random. Very, very unlikely. Almost an impossibility. Some people have actually quantified this and said anything in 10 to the 50th power, that's 1 with 50 zeros after it, would be an impossibility. Just remember, a high level of organization never comes from a chance process. Consider that on the second law of thermodynamics slide we just looked at. What this says is you could have an explosion in a print shop and it will never produce a Webster's dictionary. What would happen if you took a dictionary and dissolved it in water? You go over and you poke on it and it stays there. Keep the water on it for a day and 2 days and for a week and 2 weeks and a month, and the water's still there, and you poke on it and it's just a mass of goo. What do you do with the goo? What is different? The dictionary's still there. What was lost? The organization was lost. That organization has now been dissolved, and that information is no longer there, at least not in an intelligible form. Let's talk about the subject of design from a scientific point of view. The book dissolved in water loses its design. We just talked about that. What about symmetry? Symmetry and order, not randomness, are evidence of design. Design requires space, time, energy, raw material, and intelligence. Remember Genesis 1:1? The very first verse automatically qualifies it to be able to see design. Let's take an example, a Boeing 747, the company I worked for. Do you realize that that plane is made of 2.5 million non-flying parts? Look at a tree leaf. Look at the obvious symmetry in a tree leaf. Symmetry's obvious design. And if you look at the human eye, very much a designed piece. We don't have time to even start to touch on that. But we do know that the intelligence that we see around us that was used to make this, we know as the God of the Bible. Let's talk about the privileged Earth. This is the planet that we live on. This may be the only place in the universe that can support life. It's a problem in what they call constrained optimization. You can think of this like a laptop computer. I want my laptop computer to have infinite battery life. I want the biggest display possible. I want it to be small enough to carry around. I want it to be extremely fast. I want it to be low cost. The problem is, many of these things cannot be achieved at the same time. So in order to have something be successful, you have to have constrained optimization. Well, let's talk about the Earth. In a similar fashion, there are 44 critical parameters for the Earth to be habitable. Things like its orbit size had to be correct, its size and its distance from the sun, its distance and size of its moon, for creation of the tides that cleanses our oceans, the tilt of the axis, its rotational period, the amount of gravity, magnetic field, the plate tectonics, movement of the continents. The water itself, having water here, is critical. The temperature is critical. which has to do with the size and the distance of the sun too. Transparent atmosphere. The water to land ratio is critical. The gas giant planet protection, and you wouldn't think that that would be important, but what's really interesting is that we have two gas giants, Saturn and Jupiter, which tend to be very much involved in the attraction of large objects coming into our solar system. And our position in the galaxy is important too. There's an old design thing that is important to remember. Everybody wants quick, cheap, and good. But the reality is you can only have two. Let's talk about genetics, another scientific aspect. Did you know if a dog wants wings, he can't have them? Wings are not in the dog's gene pool. It's that simple. They can sit there and whine and cry and do whatever, but they cannot have wings. There's too many things that are involved in making sure that you not only have wings, but that you can fly too. Variations within species do occur. You can have large and small and tall and short and fat and skinny, ugly and hairy dogs, but they're all still dogs. The way this happens is through DNA. It carries the information about the organism. It uniquely identifies an individual. Mutations may happen, but they usually kill the organism. And mutations are due to a loss of information, but they never result in a change of kinds. The Bible does define kinds. The way we know kinds, for example, animal kinds, is can they breed? If they can breed and have offspring, they are of the same kind. So just remember GCAT. Those are the four pieces of DNA. And an easy way to remember it is God created all things. Let's look at a picture. Notice there's a tiger and a lion. Did you know that tigers and lions can get together depending on who's the mother and who's the father? On the left, you have a tigon, or what's called a liger. And notice how large the animal is on the right. These are real animals. How about genetics in action here? How about a husky and a Pomeranian? Depending on who the father is and who the mother is, you could have a Huscaranian, or you can end up with a Pomsky. How about other genetics? Horses and zebras. If you get a horse and a zebra together, you can get a zebroid or a zorse. And these do exist. How about a zebra and a donkey? What do you get? You guessed it, a zonkey. How about a llama and a camel? You get a llamalol or a cama. Talk about a weird looking thing. How about a polar bear and a grizzly bear? You could get a pizzly bear or a growler bear. And genetics can be adorable. Except this one. Talk about cell biology. Wow. Cells are the most complex systems mankind has ever confronted. They contain power stations, factories for manufacturing, the enzymes and the hormones that are inside. They contain a data bank of all the necessary information about all the products to be produced. They contain complex transportation systems and pipelines to move raw materials and products, advanced laboratories and refineries to break down external raw materials into usable parts, and a specialized cell membrane of proteins to control incoming and outgoing materials. A cell did not have the chance to wait for each part to develop. All of these parts had to be there at the same time for it to work. Quite an accomplishment. Quite a design. How about life? What are the characteristics of life anyway? Something it ingests, it metabolizes, it digests, it provides energy for itself, it absorbs, it secretes, it reacts to stimuli, it reproduces, and excretes. What would be an example? How about an apple? It seems simple enough, but what's inside? Guess what you see inside an apple? Seeds. We call that a complex factory to make more apples. So a cell is not enough. We need seeds too. Guess what the seed of an apple creates? More apples, the same kind. In geology, look at the geologic column. The textbook column that they constantly advertise in today's textbooks has never been found. There are no traditional forms, no transitional forms have been found, and it indicates an abrupt rise of all types of life. When you look in the geologic column, that's what you see. In the fossils, they are now the best evidence for creation. Layers are bent and misshapen. Saltwater fossils are located on the tops of mountains. Your head should immediately go to Noah and start thinking about the flood. Why would saltwater fossils be on tops of mountains? Very interesting too. How about the dating of these rocks? The dating of the rocks depends upon evolutionary sequence of the fossils, but the evolutionary interpretation of the fossils depend upon the dating of the rocks. The fallacy in this is called circular reasoning. That's why it doesn't work. How about clocks? How about radioactive decay? Helium is produced when radioactive elements decay. If decay has occurred at the present rate for 4.5 billion years, then there should be much more helium. But there is not. It's only 0.0005% of the air. Did you realize that diamonds have carbon-14 inside them? And if they do, they can't be billions of years old, or the carbon-14 would now be gone. The conclusion is there hasn't been much time for any radioactive decay. Look at a quick note. Radioisotope dating is not a good method to determine ages because it requires for us to know the initial amount of the radioactive material in the past. Think about some of our first slides. What's necessary? We need to be able to do things in the present. And the only way we could do things based on the past is we have to make assumptions. How about clocks? Let's talk about astronomy. Io. If anybody knows anything here about Jupiter, Jupiter has 28 plus moons. Io is one of the moons. It's one of the most volcanically active bodies in the solar system. In Voyager 1 in March 1979, it flew by Io and caught the eruption on the right. But the second law of thermodynamics says it should now be a cold rock, billions and billions of years. But it is not. It should be a cold rock, but it hasn't been there long enough to cool off. How about clocks? Astronomy, Saturn, Saturn's rings. They're in a thin, well-defined, stable orbit. Gravity and the second law of thermodynamics. How do those apply? If it's billions of years old, the particles should be dispersed. The brightness of the ring should be reduced by dust. But the conclusion is, they're not old. More clocks. How about the moon's orbital distance? It's increasing. The moon is known to be moving away at approximately 1 to 2 inches per year. What would that mean if it had been there for billions of years? At some point in time it was touching the surface of the earth? There's not nearly enough salt in the oceans based upon what we can find. There should be loads and loads of salt. Earth's magnetic field is decaying at 5% per century from what we can measure now. A comet's mass degrades each time it passes the sun. So based upon what we know, no comet could be more than 100,000 years old. Therefore, it hasn't been here very long. So what to remember about this? Science only applies to what can be observed in the present. The second law of thermodynamics always applies. Mutations are damaging to an organism. Design and patterns. They require energy, matter, space, time, and intelligence. The evidence indicates creation appears to be young. Therefore, number one, don't be afraid to stand for God's word. Remember this, true science supports God's word. So we should worship the one who made it possible, and that's God. Chew and spit. Don't just accept everything you hear. Always put the burden of proof on them. Ask, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? And most of the time, you'll be met with a blank stare because they've never thought past their nose. Where to get more information? Here's some links. Very good reference. And here's a few things to think about in scriptures. But I want you to look at the first few. Beware of false science. That's in 1 Timothy. Always be sure to study and handle God's word accurately. It's the only book that we can do that in. Be ready to answer any man who asks you of the hope that's in you. And remember this one. In John, the Bible does not contradict itself or what we see. And if you look at the last one, His power and divine nature can clearly be seen in creation. Right? And because of this, all are without excuse. And one last thing about truth. What is it? Truth is that which is in accord with fact or reality. It would be accurate, ideal, honest, consistent, and essential. That defines truth. But we know from the Bible it says some will change it into a lie. It will be distorted in the end times. The ungodly will suppress it. But down below, we are to speak it in love. And more importantly, it came by Jesus. What questions do you have?